Good morning and welcome back. It is now September 15th. I am back from Ontario and back on the prairies here. I think for the most part cereal harvesting is done this week, but we will see a lot of canola coming off this week, I think. So this should be decent weather this week as far as harvesting goes. So let's take a look and see what's going on. A lot of these fields of early barley that came off we're now seeing some weed regrowth. There was a few showers last week and that has really helped with the moisture conditions to get a few things germinated. So what we're seeing here, we're seeing, lots of stuff like kochia regrowth here. There's also a little bit of volunteer starting to pop up here and there. Now that we've had a little bit of moisture, you can see we have the odd barley popping up, but so far they're pretty few and far between. Of course, there is always downy brome trying to regrow. So you can see this little guy has already tried to produce some seed here. There's also some foxtail stuff like that is coming along. So it is that time we need to start taking care of some of our post-harvest weeds here. I'd like to see a little bit more volunteer before we do this. A field like this, it's very possible that if we were to come in here and hit this right away, we get a shower in the next week or so, this field is going to green up like crazy. You can also see these ones have been chopped off here. Just had a little bit of feeding here, a little bit of feeding here as well. So there's probably a cutworm here relatively close by, but we're not too concerned with him in the fall. But it's definitely a note we need to take and watch this field next year if we're seeing cutworm activity now. Lots of my canola fields right now looking very much like this one, pretty much ready to go as far as maturity goes. Seed color is looking pretty good. All that moisture we ended up with in July and early August really allowed these plants to fill out and change color and have a lot healthier looking seed compared to the last few years of drought conditions where we had some pretty shriveled and brown seeds. So yields should be pretty good in most of these fields. Well, a lot of the pulse fields that got taken off earlier in August are now by far the dirtiest fields in general. You can see here this was barley last year, so we do have a fair bit of barley volunteer in here that is now starting to put out heads, as well as we do have some pea volunteers that are in various stages from 3-4 nodes. Some are just emerging and some are even starting to flower, as well as the usual weeds like kochia. And in this field there's a little bit of volunteer alfalfa from a few years ago. So these fields, now is a good time, hit these with post-harvest treatment. Right now growing conditions are still relatively good. We got some pretty high daytime temperatures. Nighttime temperatures are nowhere near freezing at the moment. So we should be able to get really good control and fast control on a lot of our different weed species. Now that we're in September, as time goes on and our nighttime temperatures get colder, it's going to be a little slower activity on a lot of herbicides getting things working because plant metabolisms are going to slow down. But in a lot of cases right now, there just isn't enough up to spray yet. We're not really seeing any winter annuals because our nights have still been too warm, as well as there's been limited volunteer just because we haven't had much for moisture. But also at this point, we're halfway through September now. We've got 2 good weeks where we can spray pretty much any of our post-harvest burn down products. We'll have very little to no restrictions for what you can seed in those fields next year. So keep that in mind for the next 2 weeks. Once we're into October and temperatures are colder, herbicide breakdown is greatly slowed, and you really got to start paying attention to what your plans are for next year so you don't screw up your decisions going into next year. Here we have a canola field. It's been harvested in the last week. Looks like things came off pretty well, but you can really see in that stubble down here, of course we got all those buffed up pods, but look at all this foxtail that's all mixed in here, all this foxtail seed. That's because it's blowing out of this low area here, which is kind of a seasonal slough. This year it didn't really, well, the last couple of years hasn't really had anything for water in it, but it's just a massive bed of foxtail. So there's just drifts and drifts and drifts of foxtail seeds. So this would definitely be a very dangerous field to drive in with any sort of gas engined vehicle like a truck right now until we get some rain and some weather to kind of pack that foxtail seeds down. But we're definitely going to have to spray for some foxtail in this area of the field here next year. Well, they took the rain out of the forecast for today. Yesterday it was saying there was no chance of rain at all, and I might not be a meteorologist, but it really looks like rain to me. Well, this should get some of that volunteer barley and stuff germinated. I think we'll see a whole lot more weeds in the next week after a good shower like this. Well, the pulse fields that were sprayed with glyphosate and heat are definitely a little cleaner than the ones that were sprayed with Regulone, and that's pretty normal. This particular field of peas had a really thick stand of Canada thistle. You can still see some that are standing here that were missed at harvest, and you can see they are completely dead, and there's pretty much no regrowth in the patch around. You can just see all these dead ones down here. So it looks like we got a pretty good kill on this. I'm very happy with this. And as long as we can keep any regrowth suppressed in the spring next year, we should have Canada thistle more or less under control in this field. But our biggest weed in this field now, after that harvest time spraying, is volunteer peas themselves. After a couple little showers here, some of these peas are starting to emerge, so we are seeing some green in the field, but very little of it is weeds. Here in this field, we have a pretty nice second crop of oats. It's coming up on flag leaf timing and is looking pretty good. This is going to be for some fall grazing in here. This patch I'm standing in right here was a really thick with quackgrass earlier in the year. We did spray it out after the first crop came off in here, but you can never get all your quackgrass in a single application. So you can see how thick it is coming up here between the rows. And in this spot here, it's really suppressing the oats. So we're definitely going to have to do a second application in here later on this fall. Fall, of course, is the best time to get control of your quackgrass, but it will take a couple applications and some patience when it's this thick. Here by Picture Butte, corn is looking really good. This particular field is Pioneer Hybrid. It's developing pretty well. We're pretty much out of the milk stage, a lot of these now. These kernels, we are starting to develop some starches in them here now, but they still have a ways to go. There's still a fair bit of milk in each of the kernels, even though you can see that starch is starting to build up. So still a couple weeks away from ideal silage timing anyways. But if we were to get a, killing frost here soon, that can change. The overall most important thing is we take it off at the proper moisture. So a severe frost can cause corn to start to dry down quite prematurely. Here we have a field of oats that is approaching swath timing for silage. Now you can kind of see by the color of the field, we do have the odd head here and there that is really starting to come into like that dough timing, like these ones, well, these ones here. They're not quite as vibrant green, so these are kind of in the dough stage, which is what we want really for silage, but right now they're kind of a minority. Most are still quite green and milky, so we're going to give this field more time, probably another 7 to 10 days prior to cutting it to get optimum quality and tonnage in the field. Now these are Wesley oats, which do have a little bit of resistance to barley yellow dwarf virus. However, you can see we do still have some in here, so in some spots we are seeing a little bit of stunting, but for the most part it came in late enough. It's not really going to be affecting the yield to a large degree, hopefully, but I guess we will see in the end. Well, here in this field, this barley stubble, we have seeded into fall rye for next year's production, and you can see we've got some pretty good emergence going on in here. Now, right now, not all of them are up yet. Some of them are still just barely breaking the surface and coming up, but so far, looking pretty good. We'll see more in the next few days. We do have a few weeds in here. You can see we do have some volunteer canola coming up. This field was canola last year, so you're going to see some of that, as well as the ever-present volunteer barley, because this is an irrigated field, and it has now been watered, so we're going to see a lot of barley emergence. Now that can be a bigger problem than the volunteer canola because you can't really spray barley out of rye. If the barley comes up really thick here in the fall, it can put some pressure on that stand of rye, but typically the rye competes pretty well and is pretty tough. Here in this field of DeKalb canola stubble, we got some harrowing going on, which is always a great plan. I absolutely love running a harrow over any sort of canola stubble in the fall. It really helps get you better seed to soil contact, and then as soon as you get some moisture, all that canola will pop, get all of our volunteer up in the fall. We don't have to worry about so much of it in the spring. Oh, this field of pulses had a severe wild oat problem in crop, and they are really regrowing. Although we haven't had a whole lot of rain here since harvest, so regrowth has been somewhat limited. But you can see some of these guys don't even have a leaf on them, but they actually do have probably 4 or 5 viable seeds on them. They're not even really 6 inches tall, so there is quite a few are going to start setting seed in here again. Now these are going to be pretty hard targets to kill if you're coming in with a post-harvest treatment. First off, this seed is probably mature enough that it has a good chance of potentially being viable even if sprayed, although any glyphosate should help sterilize the seeds. But as you can see, there is basically no leaf material there, so that is going to be a small target hit with a spray droplet. Here in this field of wheat stubble, you can see we had a patch of lodging here, and this was caused by a really thick stand of wild oats. So you can see here we got a whole bunch of wild oat straw. You can see what's left of the old panicles here. These have pretty much all dropped their seed now. So if we start looking around down on the ground, you can see we got wild oat seed kind of scattered all over the place. Now, some of this might fall germinate if we get enough moisture. You know, if we had a wet rain event that lasted for 2 or 3 days, we'd probably get a bunch of these seeds germinated here, but right now we've got pretty poor seed to soil contact, and probably these are going to get better contact over the winter and will germinate in the spring. not nice to see. If you have the opportunity, fields like this, we really should be hitting with things like Avedex or Focus here this fall, depending on what's going into them next year. Fortress is another great fit. We do have options for some of these hard to control patches, but unless new active ingredients are on the way here pretty soon, it's definitely wild oat control. I think the next couple of years is going to get trickier and trickier. Well, that'll be it for this week. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please give us a like and subscribe. We'll see you next week.